Chapter 4. Hard Knock Life. Ash and Jeff were both lying on their couches, their eyes closed but not sleeping. Suddenly the room began to move. Up, forward, down, pushed to the left, then forward again. Finally it stopped, and the doors opened. Detective Cole stood in the bay. He looked older, weary, more exhausted than he had just a couple hours ago. "I found you some beds. Come on, transport's waiting." He gestured for them to follow. Ash and Jeff gathered their bags and followed the detective through the sprawling station, eventually reaching their destined dock. Cole walked the children out past the gate and onto the loading ramp. 3 corrections officers herded a group of convicts onto the transport. 2 anonymous officers wearing tinted visors on their helmets stood nearby, but paid no attention to Ash or Jeff. Their superior, a bald black woman, Sergeant Washington, approached Cole. Jeff stared at her head. "Detective," she acknowledged Cole. "Where to?" she asked, glancing at the children. The detective handed her the clipboard with the transfer order. 13. "What did they do?" she asked. "Didn't do anything," he replied. The sergeant looked at Ash and Jeff. "Tough break, kids." "The toughest," Cole said flatly. Jeff looked up at Cole and back to Ash. Washington turned to her subordinates. "Get these 2 in restraints," she instructed. A corporal nodded, moving toward the children with the handcuffs. The waiting prisoners immediately began taunting Ash and Jeff. The closest 2, known only as Rat and Dog, stood center stage. Yum, on some," Rat chuckled. He was short, thin, and wiry, his head narrow, his face pointy, named for his most memorable features in criminally efficient fashion. "Hey, Zero, let me see your hole," Dog jeered. Big, dumb, and clumsy-looking, he had a wide but lightly muscled frame. "Shut up, maggot," the corporal yelled. He placed his stun baton to the side of Dog's head and triggered a massive blast of electricity. The prisoner fell to the ground, reduced to stunned and drooling submission. Soon the vehicle was loaded with its prisoners, their hands locked to rails running through the seats. The hatches were sealed. Ash and Jeff sat in the front row, in handcuffs, but unlike the others, their hands were not shackled to the seats. The remaining corporal turned and stepped out of the prisoner section. Once inside the compartment with the other officers, he shut the hatch. On the other side of the door, he could see everything through the small window, if he happened to be looking. Rat and Dog leaned over the seat toward Ash, their faces close. "Hey, honey, how old are you?" Rat drooled. "Wait, let me guess. I'ma say, you're just about ripe," he chuckled. "About the years." Dog's speech and other basic motor functions still suffered from his recent close contact with 100,000 volts. "Ripe as a daisy. Let me get a taste test, baby." Ashley leaned closer to Jeff and whispered, "When I nod, duck." Jeff nodded. Ash leaned back. The guard wasn't looking at the moment, but he still faced the window and could glance up at any time. "We gonna have babies, baby." Rat pulled himself close to Ash as he could get. "The one when I saw you, I knew you was for me. Yee-haw!" Rat thrust his groin up and down in the air behind the seat. Ash looked over to Jeff and pulled her cuffs tight across her wrists. She checked to see if the corporal was looking. He was. He looked directly at her. He knew what she had planned. He smiled and slowly turned his back to the door. Ash nodded to Jeff. He ducked. Ash stood and spun, swinging her shackled fists with everything she had. Her metal braceleted wrists slammed into their faces, one to each, breaking both noses. Rat and Dog cried and screamed, but the corporal didn't look back, and his position blocked anyone else from looking in over his shoulder. Ash sat and lowered her head. Jeff stared at his sister, smiling. 40 minutes later, the transport glided to a landing on the prison. The corporal opened the metal door. Rat and Dog's faces were destroyed. Dried blood clumped all down their chests. The corporal walked to the back of the transport and began unlocking the prisoners, silently lining them up to disembark. Sergeant Washington stood in the open doorway but said nothing. She followed the human chain off the vehicle and turned them over to the prison officials. No one made any acknowledgement of the newly wounded Rat and Dog. Once the prisoners offloaded, the transport made preparations to disembark. Sergeant Washington addressed the corporal. "Uncuff these 2, she said, gesturing to Ash and Jeff. "I think they're safe for the moment." The corporal nodded and removed the handcuffs. Ash looked out the window as the transport lifted off. The guards surrounding the prisoners rushed toward the chained men. With fully charged batons, they beat them to the ground. Their arms worked like pistons, their legs spread wide for sure footing and extra power. She could practically hear the bones snap. Blood splashed into the air like a thing alive, leaping from both the batons and the prisoners' broken bodies. Ash watched the attack until the transport made a turn into traffic, removing the spectacle from her field of vision. Nearly an hour later, the vehicle moved away from the steady flow of freeway traffic toward District 13, the Angel City Orphanage and Juvenile Detention Facility. The transport landed and everyone stepped off. The guards stretched their legs and looked around the old-style courtyard. Sergeant Washington led Ash and Jeff toward a pair of large double doors. "I'm sure someone will be out in a minute." Ash thought the facility seemed less inviting than the prison, with the exception of a similar reception. She sincerely hoped no one had noticed their presence. Perhaps they could go somewhere else. But inevitably the tall front door of the orphanage unlocked and opened. 2 district guards stepped out and approached the sergeant. Their manner seemed both hostile and submissive. Despite the fact that they bore the same rank as Sergeant Washington and her corporals, Washington and the ACPD officers stood taller and prouder than their District 13 counterparts. The pronounced differences consisted of numerous subtle affectations, individually inconclusive, but taken as a whole, definitive. From District 13, Sergeant Wolfgar and Corporal Harrison were of the Neanderthal variety, both powerfully built, wide, and muscular. Their uniforms were rumpled and worn, their faces unshaven, boots scuffed, rough, and old. Their unkempt appearance a sharp contrast with the metropolitan officers. Sergeant Wolfgar silently directed Ash and Jeff toward the gaping entry, and then turned to Sergeant Washington. "Documents?" he asked. Washington handed Wolfgar the clipboard. He didn't look at it. He simply turned and re-entered the orphanage without another word. Corporal Harrison followed close behind, and once inside, he closed and locked the huge doors. Reception area occupied most of the floor. At the opposite end, an ornate stairwell led to the second floor. Young guards lined the walls, standing at attention, perfectly still. Wolfgar stopped just inside the doors and folded his hands behind his back. Ash watched him cautiously, Jeffrey at her side. "You are now wards of the court," the gruff sergeant stated. He pointed to Ash. "You are Orphan 231-00915-03. He emphasized the zeros. He turned to Jeff. "You are Orphan 231-00915-04. That's today's date, 03 and 04. In case you forget, use the 0. "I'm not a number. I'm a free man," Jeffrey said. "Cute." Wolfgar let the joke slide. "You will attend school, participate in athletics, and if you are very smart, stay as quiet as possible." He directed this last to the young boy. "Now, if you would be so accommodating as to empty your bags." Wolfgar gestured for them to dump their bags on the floor between them. They did. "This facility prohibits certain items." The sergeant pushed the piles of clothing around the floor. "But you aren't going to kill anyone with t-shirts and underwear, are you?" "Clean this up and follow me," Wolfgar ordered. Jeff desperately wanted to look at his sister's hand, but he resisted the temptation. As they walked from the central hall, Jeff watched the guards who remained silent and still. They never once acknowledged the children's presence. Sergeant Wolfgar led them across the district to their dormitory. "While walking, or in the presence of the security staff, keep your hands behind your back at all times. Any deviation from this rule will be dealt with in the severest possible terms." The sergeant swung his baton in a low arc for emphasis. Ash and Jeffrey's hands were full with their bags, but they noticed that all the kids they saw put their hands behind their backs once the sergeant came into view. As they entered the designated dormitory, Wolfgar gestured to a set of bunk beds and lockers. "You are Green Stripe, Level 3, North Wing. Units 315 and 316. These are your lockers. They've already been stocked with your full issue. These are your beds. You will eat in the Green Stripe cafeterias. You will go to school just like everybody else. Learn the rules. If you break them, you will regret it. The recreation rooms, video screens, and game consoles are through those doors over there. May as well go meet your new neighbors and get it over with." Ashley and Jeff didn't move. "Good luck," Wolfgar said, as he and Harrison turned and left the dorm. Two heavily carpeted stair-stepped ledges occupied either side of the recreation room. 20 to 30 kids of various ages lay scattered across the semi-comfortable platforms, watching a vid stream. Ash and Jeff entered at the back of the room. In the front, two orphans argued over which program to watch. "Man, I don't want to watch the news," a lanky boy complained. A healthy amount of grumbling echoed his lament. His opponent, Zager, black-haired and sporting a bowl cut, was persistent. "I'm telling you, man, they got pictures." Zager succeeded in his struggle for the remote and changed the channel. On the news, an anchor sat at her desk in the upscale studio. Over her shoulder, gruesome images emphasized her report. "We now take you to the Angel City suburb of Eagle Rock, California, where earlier today the Carlson family was brutally murdered." Images of the bodies, bound and vivisected in gory detail, filled the screen. "This is the fourth such case attributed to Angel City's newest serial killer, the Family Man," she said. A young girl turned away from the display, horrified. "Turn it off!" She waved her hand in emphasis. She opened her eyes and saw Ash and Jeff standing at the back of the room. "Who are you?" she asked. Everyone turned, the newscast instantly forgotten. One of the bigger kids, Polly, marched forward. "Yeah, who the heck are you? What the heck you doing here? This ain't your stripe." Polly was mostly bald except for a sharp-pointed strip at the crown of his hairline. His upper lip was thin and nearly non-existent below his bulbous nose. "Get lost, clown." Jeffrey stepped forward. Paul hesitated, stunned to be openly insulted by someone he could so easily crush. Jeff held the floor and continued to mock the older orphan. He walked in a quick little circle, swinging his arms at his sides and sticking out his lower lip, doing a simian monkey impression. "Who the heck is you? What the heck? I run this place. I'm the boss." The children gasped, giggled, and laughed. "Oh, a toddler. I'm scared." Paul grabbed his crotch and stepped forward. "Prepare to level up, D13 style." Jeff snapped forward, his fist up. Paul jumped back, flinching at Jeff's sudden movement. "Ha! Two for flinching," Jeff laughed, stepping up to hit Paul on the shoulder. But Paulie raised a fist, furious. Ash reached out to Jeff's shoulder, gesturing for him to back off. Paul glared at Ashley. She glared back. No one moved. Out of nowhere, Ashley punched Paulie in the mouth, chipping his front teeth and shredding his lips. On the ground, he lifted his hand to his ruined mouth, the fight fully gone out of him. Silence. Ash glared at the new faces, looking for other challengers. Someone giggled. Someone else laughed. "That was awesome," Zager said. Paul struggled up to a sitting position. He tried to get to his feet but collapsed again. Someone pointed at him and burst into laughter. Paul looked humiliated. Ash turned and walked from the room, taking Jeff with her. As they returned to the kid-filled dorm, Ash noticed a couple guards at each intersection and doorway. She and Jeff headed to their beds. Reaching Ashley's locker first, she dug out her bathroom kit. "I'm gonna go brush. You should too." "I forgot my toothbrush," Jeff said. Ash pulled Jeff's travel bag from her pack and handed it to him. He smiled. "Thanks, Ash." She ruffled his hair. Jeff watched her slip the black stiletto, their father's legacy, into the side pocket of her shower bag. Ashley entered the bathroom. Several girls stood talking in the sink area. When she entered, they went silent. No one spoke to her as she picked out an open sink to brush her teeth at. Between the sinks and mirrors, Jeff stood in the center of a ring of boys. "Your sister, huh?" Zager asked. "She messed Polly up good." "Yeah, he got on her bad side," Jeff agreed. "Bad side?" one of the boys joked. "From where I was standing, it was all good." Everyone laughed. Jeff grinned. A few minutes later, several girls stood clustered around Ash. "I can't believe you just hit him like that," Lisa, who hadn't wanted to watch the news story, exclaimed. "I think she broke his jaw," a redhead asserted. "I saw bits of teeth go flying," a dark-haired girl said. "He was all bloody, I heard." Carla, a brute of a girl, stepped forward, followed by an even meaner-looking friend. "I hate Polly," said Mona, Carla's companion. She resembled an Olympic powerlifter in a muscle shirt, with shoulders like a man. It was obvious his weak spot was his mouth, Ash humbly observed. A bunch of girls laughed, but nervously drifted away. "There are a couple guys who won't go down so easy," Mona said. The boys leaned in around Jeff, somber and serious. "All I'm saying is, Polly's a small fry. There are guys here that will break your sister like a twig. Jeff shook his head and rolled his eyes. You don't understand. She's Ash. She's never lost a fight. The guys shook their heads. Jeff took offense. You don't believe me? Fine. You go mess with her. He laughed. I dare you. Listen, mi poquito amigo. We don't have to do anything, but someone will. Guaranteed. Yeah, well, Polly won't do it again. Jeff grinned. A bunch of the guys laughed. Kima had joined Mona and Carla. The three of them cornered Ashley. Clearly the leader, Kima looked her up and down. What I'm trying to say here is there's some heavy hitters in this hellhole. I believe you, Ash answered. Kima leaned in. Sister, we gotta work together here. We're an all-girl gang. No one lays a hand on us we don't want 'em to, she explained. We look out for each other, understand? Ash didn't move away. What I'm trying to say is, you want to join up with us. Join up with you? Ash asked. Run with our set, posse with this crew. Kima gestured to the other girls nearby. There's only 3 of you? Ash asked. Suddenly several other girls, who seemed to be not involved at all, stood up straight and turned to face Ash. We're the Leonas, Kima said, gesturing to the room full of fierce-looking teen girls. There were dozens of them, though few as intent or as threatening as Kima. Ash didn't recognize any of them from her earlier conversation. Well, it's something to think about, isn't it? Kima leaned forward again, smiling. There is one thing, though. Ash raised her hand between them. I have to take care of my little brother. That's exactly why you should join up with us, so he'll be protected, Kima answered. But you said you're an all-girl gang, right? Could you take boys in your gang? Ash asked. Absolutely not. Well then, what if he joins a different gang? Would I maybe have to fight him someday? Kima leaned back to think about it. Damn, girl, that's a hard spot. That's what I'm saying. Maybe think about letting boys in. Then we'd have to be the Lions, and we can't do that. That name's retired on this district. Ash shrugged and extricated herself from the gang, holding up her toothbrush. Back in the dorm, Ash met Jeff as they headed back toward their bunks. Jeff looked tired, distracted. I don't want to sleep here, Ash, he said. I know, me neither, she answered. Let's jack a ride and break out of this shithole. You want top bunk or bottom? Can I sleep with you tonight? Yeah, okay, sure. 10 minutes later, at 11, a bell rang and the lights in the dorm automatically shut off. Jeff fell asleep before Ashley's eyes had even finished adjusting to the darkness. She listened to the sound of kids settling to sleep around her. The guards patrolled the wide aisles of the dorm, their measured footfalls consistent and rhythmic. She heard one nearby and another across the room, while 2 more walked the distant section of the hall. She closed her eyes and listened. She could count at least 1 citizen standing at each of the major doorways. She wasn't sure about the far one until he finally coughed and gave his position away. Ash knew where all of them stood or walked. Then, as if her listening channels were a collapsing house of cards, her brother whispered in his sleep, Surprise! Happy birthday! Are you surprised? It was a secret. Ash didn't sleep for a long time that night. She heard all the guards exit the dorm after an hour or so. She listened to the kids cough, move around, and eventually she too drifted off to sleep. When next she woke, it was morning. Chapter 5. Murder, Torture, Rape. It could happen to you. Ash and Jeff rose from their bunk, dressed, and after visiting the bathroom, reunited and joined the current of children as they flowed to the cafeteria. They entered the doorless, cavernous space and found the main line, waiting their turn to pull trays from the stacks and slide them along the rail toward the morning's various foodstuffs. The orphans around them moved at half speed, making eye contact with no one. Someone got in line behind them. Ash heard him laugh, loudly, right in her ear. Then he grabbed her butt, hard, squeezing it. Ashley spun, confronting the boy. Hi, I'm Vic, he said. Ash punched him in the mouth, hard, rocking his head back, leaving his lips and teeth bloody. Vic shook his head, furious. He wasn't big, or especially tough, but he looked plenty mad and ready to retaliate. However, someone in the crowd over Ashley's shoulder distracted him. 2 huge guys cut in line ahead of Ash, sliding trays down the rail. Jeff looked back at her and scowled. Ash shook her head, discouraging him before he opened his mouth. Suddenly, Vic wasn't just nervous, he was terrified. He'd forgotten all about Ash and his lip. He spun, ready to flee the cafeteria, but froze when he saw 2 other kids walking directly toward him. He turned around again, holding his place in line. They all ignored him, but he was petrified. Ash and Jeff moved down the line. Ashley watched the other kids moving around the cafeteria. They seemed groggy with that early morning pre-breakfast lethargy. She watched a kid walking up the line, moving past everyone. He wore his red sweatshirt with the hood up, partially concealing his face. He was moving fast. He approached Vic and put a hand on his shoulder. Ash positioned herself to appear as though she weren't watching. "Lethal, no, I swear. I was coming to see you," Vic said. The hooded boy whispered into Vic's ear and lightly punched him in the small of the back. Vic appeared to be in agony, gulping air like a fish that found itself removed from water. The hooded boy, Lethal, moved away, vanishing into the crowded cafeteria. Ash watched Vic tremble. He leaned against the rail for support. The two big guys, who'd cut in line ahead of her, left without looking back, crossing through the cafeteria. The guys behind Vic were already gone, their trays abandoned on the rail. Ash saw a puddle of blood spreading around Vic's shoes. She backed away, grabbing Jeff and leaving the line as the fatally stabbed boy collapsed to the floor. No one noticed her stepping away. All they saw was Vic. He reached out for help from someone, anyone, his eyes saying what his lungs had lost the strength to voice. Everyone in the room decided they'd had enough and left their trays. In moments, the cafeteria held abandoned breakfasts at every table. Outside, Ash and Jeff wandered down the seemingly endless playground. The idea of putting food to mouth seemed nauseating in the cold, hard sunlight. District 13, Angel City Orphanage and Juvenile Detention Facility, was made up of 6 separate properties, welded, bracketed, and fused together. Their anti-gravity discs worked in unison to keep it aloft. Not all the kids were juvenile delinquents, nor were they all orphans. But of the 10,000 residents, most served some of their times in both camps. Delinquents with parents in good standing never found themselves consigned to 13. An athletic complex occupied the center position of the district. Shaped like a vertical box kite, the complex featured sprawling athletic fields, over a dozen full-size gymnasiums, a massive arena, and 7 smaller stadiums, along with medical facilities and dormitories for up to 4,000 residents. Almost as large as the athletic facility was the Bolt, occupying the northeastern half of the district. The Bolt was like Russia to the rest of Europe, big, mean, and cold. The juvenile detention section was once a portion of a maximum security prison. Now defunct, it had been cut into pieces and parceled out to charities like orphanages. A couple thousand grammar school students occupied the ancient Victorian orphanage on the northernmost side of the facility, where Ashley's transport had initially landed, also known as the 00 for the old orphanage. It was the only unit in the district built for the express purpose of housing children. Of all the units, it was by far the most frightening and intimidating, as it resembled a massive haunted house. Running the northeastern edge of the district was a proper school, called the Terminal, made up of 3 large rectangular structures, each housing one of the traditional grading groups, i.e. grammar school, junior high, or high school. It was called the Terminal for the massive bays of free-use terminals on every floor. Vid streams were authorized during off-school hours, and the black market economy aboard the district depended heavily on the legitimate wages earned by the code monkeys, kids working full or part-time, writing computer code and streaming it for credits. Finally, at the southwestern corner was God's Hotel, a donated resort property housing the toddlers and grammar school students. District maps referred to it as the White Block. Each block could be reached by following its stripe on the district signage. Every block had its own color. In the crisp morning air, Ash and Jeff walked with the general flow of children across the fields toward the terminal education buildings. As they approached, Ash noticed the kids splitting up. The kids her age headed toward the building on the east side of the complex, while Jeff seemed bound for the center building of the structure. Jeff stood looking at his sister. "I guess I'll see you after school," she said. He looked away, not speaking. Ash hugged him. He briefly returned the hug, but then pulled away. "See ya, Ash." Jeff turned, not wanting his sister to see him cry. Ash watched him go until he vanished in the sea of kids. Inside the high school building, Ashley noticed that all the interior doors had been removed. Most rooms were terminal halls, row upon row, back to back, 5 or 6 columns deep. Hundreds of kids could fit in each hall. Being kids, most of them goofed off unless a guard stood nearby. In the presence of the baton-wielding citizens, the orphans remained silent and reserved. Intersections where the guards clustered together were completely avoided, if at all possible. Ash went up a flight of stairs and slipped into one of the terminal halls. Some of the other orphans noticed her, but pretended not to. She took a seat near the door. A bigger-than-normal guy, half sitting, half kneeling on the next chair, talked with someone on the other side of the row. Without even looking at Ash, he reached out and grabbed a hold of her chair, spinning it away from her. "Seat saved," he said, over his shoulder, between chomps on a mouthful of chewing gum. Ash didn't let him take the chair. "Not anymore," she said. He stood up and turned away from his conversation. He was at least a head taller than Ashley and looked significantly stronger. Like sharks having caught the scent of blood, those sensing the oncoming conflict quickly grew quiet. "Are you going to hit me over a chair?" Ashley asked. The silence hung in the air for a moment. He hesitated. "Don't be a dick," Ashley said, forcing the issue. A few giggles and snickers slipped out of the kids nearby. "Yeah, Dick, don't be a dick," someone said. At this, a dozen students burst into laughter. "It's like telling a mouse not to eat cheese," a fully bearded teen with garishly orange-frosted hair, oddball, said loudly, inciting peals of laughter. Dick grew beet red. "Just don't call him a penis," another kid yelled. Even Ashley laughed. "Best name in this hellhole." "Go on, tell her, Slim Jim," someone yelled. Dick shook with anger. "Give it to her straight, Johnson. You gotta be cocky, Peter. Give her the beef, Slick Rick." The taunts came from everywhere. Dick became enraged. He threw a haymaker at Ash and she easily dodged it. The audience gasped. Ash stepped back. Dick followed like a stumbling windmill, his flurry hardly a threat to the experienced girl. She sidestepped him and let him careen past her. Dick burst into the hallway and collided with a guard. He hit the citizen in the face and knocked him backward. The guard touched his mouth. His hand came away wet with blood. The guard looked at Ash and back at Dick, comprehending what must have been going on. He raised his baton and turned the voltage all the way up. He unmercifully smacked Dick across the face with it, the shock blasting him from his feet. "Chasing a girl around, huh?" the guard inquired, literally hitting first and asking questions later. He charged up the baton again and gave Dick a shot to the ribs, followed by one to the groin. He continued with a boot to the face, another baton to the head, and he was just getting warmed up. The guard went berserk on Dick, beating him with the baton until he broke almost every bone in the poor kid. Dick began to have trouble breathing, and finally the guard stopped. Probably no more than a hair's breadth from putting the boy into convulsions, a coma, and/or death. A bell rang. The guard looked up. The room before him was full of staring and speechless children. "Well, get to it," he shouted, "unless someone else wants to volunteer." They all turned, unfolded the shutters from their monitors, activated their terminals, and buried their faces in the streaming schoolwork. The guard gave Dick a final kick. Richard groaned, but held on. He stayed conscious, his breathing stabilized, and convulsions never set in. 6 weeks and you'll be fine, the guard muttered and wandered off. No one spoke, looked around, or did anything but schoolwork, except for Dick, who twitched every now and again. A few minutes later, a pair of nurses with a collapsible stretcher arrived to load up the wounded boy. The nurses, young women in their early 20s, were both quite pretty, even in medical smocks. Some of the boys turned away from their terminals to watch. Once the nurses wheeled Richard away, the kids looked over to Ash. Big Chris broke the silence. "Hey, new girl." Ash ignored him. Chris spun his mounted chair around. Everything about him was thick and heavy, from his feet to his dark black hair. "Hey, hot stuff," Chris called out. Some of the kids laughed. Ash turned to face him. The room went quiet. Chris stood, crossed the aisle, and offered his hand. "Big Chris." "Ashley," she replied. Chris shook her hand, but she didn't stand up. "Why was he so mad?" she asked. "His name's Richard Peter Johnson," Chris explained. "No, not him. The guard. Why did he go nuts like that?" "They're all like that," a lanky black kid with a massive afro, Jones, answered. "All them citizens, they all alike. I'm gonna kill every last one of 'em I ever get the chance." "Hear, hear, my man," said the bearded oddball. "Hear, hear." Lunchtime in the cafeteria, Ashley sat with a tray of unappealing food. Across the table, halfway down from her, sat a few other girls. One of them looked up at Ashley, but before the girls could acknowledge each other, her friends drew her attention away. Ash heard them call her Sky and watched as she tucked her long, beautiful brown hair behind an ear. She looked like any of the other pretty girls he'd attended in Rivendell, but Ashley wasn't at Rivendell anymore. Ash thought about the morning so far. After self-study, the high school students had 2 90-minute classes called practicals. First, science and English. Every other day they would switch between these two and mathematics and history. Practicals were taught by actual instructors, with assistants, but they weren't like the teachers Ashley was accustomed to. They seemed more like tour guides, completely uninterested in whether the students were paying attention or not. Ash looked up, distracted from her thoughts by a knot of quick-moving boys that entered the cafeteria. Carver, Otai, Mike, and Robbie stepped through the doors and double-checked their objectives. They acted with decisive swiftness. They hadn't come for the food. "Don't screw this up," Carver said to the younger kids behind him. Philip Carver wasn't especially tall or otherwise intimidating, but what he lacked in stature, he made up for in mean-spirited aggression. The thin soul patch on his chin seemed to identify him as his own evil twin. Robbie glanced over to Mike as they split off to handle their individual duties. Mike and Robbie, apprenticing to Carver, were a few years younger. They each approached one of the standing guards. Robbie, a tall, lanky kid, slipped the guard something, and a moment later, he left. Across the room, Mike stood in the other guard's place, as that uniformed young man was also on his way out. In a few moments, the room contained only children. Walking next to Carver was his right-hand man, Otai. He too sported what little facial hair he could across the top of his lip, with a little soul patch on his chin. The Devils proclaimed to be an equal opportunity gang, culturally diverse and not segregated by race. Carver, an indifferent American mutt, might have been welcome in almost any of the 6 major gangs. He considered himself a player, and he made money. Otai, of Hispanic/Asian descent, could have gone with the Yellow Jackets or the Blades. They both offered recruitment opportunities with their parent organizations, the Hong Kong Triad or Mara Salvatrucha, should he survive the district. However, the Devils held a substantial amount of territory in Angel City, and on the district, they ruled. Carver and Otai walked directly to the other side of Ashley's table. Carver smacked the girl Ash had earlier made eye contact with, Sky. "Hey, bitch," Carver said. The girl next to Sky, Shelley, turned toward them, but Otai grabbed her head and pushed her face down into her food. "Mind your business." He smeared Shelley's face in her tray, getting food everywhere. Carver tried to jerk Sky up by the shoulders, attempting to pull her from her seat. "Come on, get the hell up." She struggled to stay put. "Ty, this bitch ain't up and walking in 5. I want you to break Shelley's nose for her. Hear me? 5, 4. Otai pushed hard on Shelley's face. She cried out in pain. Otai leaned over her. "Hear that, Shelley? I'm gonna break your beak," he taunted. Sky struggled to get out of her seat, but Carver held her down and kept counting. 3, 2. Sky twisted away from Carver and out of her seat. She stood in the aisle looking at them. "The hell is your problem, asshole?" she yelled. "You're my problem," Carver shouted back. "Get outside. Now." Carver shoved her toward the door. Otai roughly kissed Shelley's face, put his tongue in her ear, and pumped his hips against her back. "Thank you, baby. You were great," he whispered. Before he stepped away, he slapped Shelley's head, bouncing it off the table. She sat up crying, her nose and mouth bloody. Otai followed Carver from the cafeteria. Shelley got up from the table and ran to the bathroom, blood streaming from her face. Ahead of them, Mike opened the door, and Carver shoved Sky through and out onto the playground. Otai glared back at the lunchroom, then exited, followed by Mike and Robbie. Ash stood up from the table. A bunch of kids watched her walk directly toward the door. No one made a sound. The boys had deliberately chosen a door that opened onto a forested part of the facility. Ash could hear them ahead of her, but she couldn't see them yet. She followed. In a small clearing ahead, Carver confronted Sky. "So what the hell, Sky? What are you going to do about my 2 honey?" "Look, Carver, this is not my fault. I fronted you 2 bills. That's a lot of yardage by my stretch. I fronted you." "Oh, bullshit. I never came to you with my hand out. You forced this on me. I never wanted any of this." "What? You think I set you up? You're saying I set you up? Bitch!" Carver violently slapped Sky across the mouth, knocking her back a couple steps. Sky looked up at him, her mouth bloody. "Yeah, what do you got to say now?" Carver taunted the defenseless girl. "Screw you!" Sky yelled. Carver stepped forward and delivered an overhand punch to Sky's face, knocking her from her feet. "Fine by me. You still got assets I can repossess. I'm gonna shift 6 in your guts." Carver started to unbuckle his pants. "One way or another, I'm getting my money's worth." Ashley moved in a wide circle around the drama, not drawing the attention of Otai, Mike, or Robbie. She could see Carver and Sky now. Sky squirmed backwards away from Carver. He jumped on her and pinned her to the ground and ripped at her top. Sky fought back and he punched her in the face repeatedly. Dazed and beaten, she was soon incapable of resisting. Carver ripped Sky's shirt open and started to undo her pants. Ash stepped into view from behind the brush on the other side of the clearing. Kneeling over Sky, Carver faced her. His friends arrayed behind him. "Oh, hey, sexy," he said, sitting on Sky's hips. "You want to join the party? We're just getting started." Ashley walked toward Carver, stopping just a step away. "How about I tear you up just as soon as I'm done with her? How's that sound?" Carver laughed. Ash stepped forward with a mighty roundhouse kick, her foot coming up and swinging fast across Carver's face, connecting with his chin. The kick snapped his head all the way around on his shoulders. Carver fell backwards off Sky. He landed on his back, his face twisted down into the grassy dirt. Carver's friends stared at the body, its head 180 degrees wrong. They looked up at Ash. "Is he dead?" Robbie asked. "I'm out." Mike turned and walked from the scene. Robbie hesitated for a split second, but followed. Otai looked at Robbie and Mike, who left him to make his own choice, but quickly. He could face Ash and Sky, but they would inevitably be caught with Carver. "Another time, then, bitches," Otai said to the girls, abandoning his dead or dying friend. "Is he really dead?" Sky asked. Ash knelt next to Carver. "Looks like he's breathing, maybe." Ashley picked up Sky's shirt and handed it to her. "Let's get out of here," she said, pulling the battered girl to her feet. The shirt was still wearable, albeit ripped and stretched out of shape. Sky pulled it back on. As they left the clearing, Carver made a hideous croaking sound. The further away they got, the louder his guttural cry became. His death rattle, if indeed it was, pursued them under the overcast sky. Soon Carver's terrible cries could be heard all the way across the playground. Before long, a couple of social workers, compelled to investigate, discovered and rushed the injured teen to the closest medical ward. In a nearby girl's bathroom, Ash and Sky stood in front of a mirror, checking out the damage Carver had done to her face. The room stunk of disinfectant and wet cement. "Why did you help me?" Sky asked. "I don't know," Ash answered. "Well, I don't mean to sound ungrateful. Thank you. But now we're both in real trouble." "I've been in trouble before," Ash answered. "Not like this." Sky held a wet paper towel to the bridge of her nose. "I couldn't just let him rape you," Ash countered. "He's a devil. They're the toughest gang in the district." Her left eye seemed to swell and grow more purple with each passing moment. "I'm glad you helped me, though. Really, thank you." "You're welcome," Ash replied. "You're new, aren't you?" Sky asked. "It's my first day," Ash nodded. Sky looked at Ashley in the mirror. "Then you're not protected." "What do you mean?" Ash asked. "Everyone pays protection to one of the gangs. It's like insurance. A lot of kids here are with the Fist. Some are Martians." "Martians?" "Red Stripe," Sky answered. "A lot of the gangs pick names based on their color. Yellow Stripe is the Yellow Jackets. Mostly Asian, all dressed like Jun Fan disciples. Some gangs don't care what race you are, like the Dragons or the Devils. The Devils are the worst. They pretty much run everything." A bell rang, indicating the end of their lunch hour. Sky jumped at the opportunity to change the subject. "Afternoon practicals are more fun than the morning classes. First it's art or music, and then gym. Today's art. I like music days better. I play piano." "That's cool," Ash said. "I can't play any instruments." "I'll teach you if you want," Sky offered. Ashley smiled and nodded as they left the washroom. Chapter 6. The New Girl. As the girls passed a medical station, one of the social workers saw Sky's face and pulled her into the ward. She barely spoke, but went straight to work treating Sky's wounds with blue healing gel and nanotape. She didn't object to Ashley lingering, and a few minutes later sent them on their way. Ash and Sky slowly drifted down the hallway toward art class. A large group of boys leaned against a wall near the door. As they approached, Sky explained the breakdown. "We're Green Stripe, so that's the only real Democratic gang here. The Iron Fist. There's a bunch of them right up ahead. The kid talking, that's Kasimov." Sky lowered her voice. "He's a lead striker on the district punchball team. He's not stupid either. He's on a roll, aiming for a sponsor. He'll get it too if he doesn't get hurt or anything." "Technically he's not in the gang," Sky whispered. "Hambone runs everything. He and Kaz have been tight since grammar school." "No, man, that's not what happened," Kaz said, taller and stronger than most adults. He glanced up and caught Ashley's eye as she approached. "I was there, fool," Hambone, a well-fed teen with thick sideburns, pointed out. He wore district-issue clothes, but several sizes too large, sporting expensive sneakers and a track jacket. Off-district items were obviously a hot commodity, standing out amid the otherwise standard-issue apparel. "Yeah, so we all were," Kaz reminded his rotund partner. "Really, Ham? What the hell?" Rudy asked. "That's Rudy and Taylor," Sky explained. "They claim to be twins, but no one really believes it. They arrived at the orphanage on the same day, but..." Rudy was black. The teen was wearing an extravagant derby cap colored in red, green, and orange swatches. He wore a full beard and boasted a gut that rivaled Hambone's. His brother, Taylor, in stark contrast, was white, tall, and thin. He wore an electric guitar strapped across his back and couldn't shave if he'd wanted to. Jones, whom Ashley had met earlier, also stood nearby. The lightly muscled teenager wore a 00 basketball jersey over a t-shirt. She hadn't noticed the off-district shirt earlier. All she'd remembered was his perfectly spherical hairstyle. Jones smiled as the girls approached. Ash and Sky crossed in front of them, and, predictably, the boys stopped talking. The girls kept moving, gliding past. They entered the hall, and after a moment they heard the laughter and sighs. Inside the vast hall, Ash was overwhelmed with the variety of artistic activities available. There were literally dozens to choose from. One group of students were sketching at easels, gathered around a tastefully clothed model. In another tiled section, teens practiced making pottery, the wet, spinning clay splattering across floors and aprons. Several painted on canvases set up over drop cloths. Most of the students sat, scattered around various desks, peacefully doodling with pens and markers. Sky looked at Ash. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. I never did this kind of stuff." "They didn't have art at your school?" "They did, but I took different electives." "What's an elective?" "It's just, it wasn't like this." "So you really don't have an artistic hobby?" "Not really." "Want to draw some t-shirt designs with me? You can make pretty good money selling custom shirts and stuff," Sky said. Ash nodded. Sky led her toward his supply cabinet. "If you design something really cool, you can sell it online for like $20. If you're really good, or if you have an idea people like, you can sometimes get more." "Wow," Ash said, genuinely excited. Sky smiled. "Everything we need is here." Sky opened a cabinet and carried baskets of markers, pencils, and paper over to an empty table. Ash followed, noticing the guy's hungry, sidelong stares. If they were any more obvious, they would be drooling. Rudy wiped the back of his hand across his mouth just to check. Ash laughed. Sky ignored the flirting, still unsettled after her run-in with Carver. "You can draw anything on a t-shirt," she said. "Sometimes I just draw different symbols, musical notes, hearts, and stars and stuff." Sky set down the supplies, taking a seat before the pencils, markers, and paper. "I had a few that were bars of music from famous symphonies, and then I would put the composer's name under it, like a quote, They sold pretty good for a while." "You did that? That's cool. I remember those. Some of the girls in my class had them." Ash smiled, genuinely impressed. Sky blushed and looked away. "Yeah, we only sold maybe a couple hundred before some big label copied us and everyone had one. And no one wanted mine anymore." Hambone turned out to be the one who approached the girls first. "Looks like we're drawing today, gentlemen." Hambone spoke to the guys over his shoulder as he walked towards Sky and Ashley. "Man, oh man, this is gonna be good." Jones laughed and sat at the closest table. Hambone seemed to have second thoughts and veered off in his direct approach. He did smile to Ash and Sky before turning to Kaz and the others, proclaiming, "Let's get some supplies, what do you say?" Sky watched the boys rummage through the various supply cabinets. After a moment she looked back to Ash. "So you never took any music or art classes, huh?" "No, I was mostly into dance. And school, grades." "Yeah," Sky said. "How long have you been here?" Ash asked. "Oh, well..." Sky scratched her head. "Sorry," Ash said. "It's okay. I've been here since the middle of second grade, so almost 8 years." The girls sat quietly for a moment as Hambone and his friends loudly raided the supply cabinets. "Hey, I didn't say anything earlier, but I heard about what you did to Polly last night. They had to wire his jaw shut? That was you, wasn't it? You broke Polly the parrot's jaw." Ash lowered her head. "Polly the parrot?" "Yeah, that's what they call him. Anyhow, I'm sure he deserved it. The guy's a total asshole, just like Carver. Thanks again for that, by the way." Ash looked up to her new friend. "You don't have to keep thanking me." "No, it's okay. I heard that a new girl beat him up, and When I saw you in the lunchroom, I knew it was you. I thought it was. Ash looked at her and flashed a warm, conspiratorial grin. Hambone stepped forward. "Hey, Sky, can we sit by you guys?" he asked, sitting before Sky could answer. Hambone waved the rest of his friends over to the girl's otherwise unoccupied table. Hambone sat next to Sky, across from Ashley. It was Kasimov who sat down beside her. "Hey, Hambone, guys," Sky said. The rest of the crew filled in around the table. Some of them raised their hands and offered grunts in lieu of proper greetings. "What, happened to your face?" Hambone asked. "Nothing," Sky replied, unwilling to share the details. "And nothing must have really been something." "What do you want, Hambone?" Sky asked. "You know, liberty, equality, the good stuff. So who's this?" he asked, gesturing to Ash. "Guys, this is Ash." Sky gestured to Ashley, introducing her to the guys. "Ash, this is Hambone, Kaz, Lee, Rudy, Taylor, Max, Liam, and that's Jones." Ash recognized him and waved. Jones smiled and winked. "Pleased to meet you." Hambone reached out for Ashley's hand and she instinctively withdrew. Kaz laughed. Hambone held his hands up, smiling. He turned to Sky. "So what are we drawing today, Blue?" Ash raised an eyebrow. "I call her Blue," Hambone said, looking at Sky, who was blushing. "Since 4th grade or so, I think. She's my little sister, Sky Blue." Hambone put his arm over Sky's shoulder. "And when I find out who did this..." Hambone brushed some of the hair away from Sky's battle-damaged face. He looked at Ashley. Ash met his stare and changed the subject. "So, can any of you guys draw?" she asked. "Lee is a goddamn genius," Kasimov said, gesturing to the smaller boy sitting on the other side of Hambone. Ashley smiled and nodded to Lee. "I want to put a drawing of a fox on my shirt," she explained. "But I don't want him all cutesy and weak." "You want me to draw you a fox, but you don't want him to be cute?" Lee asked. "Yes, please. Can you make him cool? Like, a little dangerous." The boys melted. Sky rolled her eyes. "Sure, Lee leaned over a piece of paper and went to work with a marker. In moments he finished and lifted the paper. "Like this?" he asked. The image was shaped like an inverted star, with the top points, the ears, flared out. The bottom points on the right and left curved up, like whiskers. The bottom, narrow chin was squared off. In the center he drew narrowed eyes with sharp peaked brows. The fox looked wicked dangerous. "Damn, you are good," Ash said, impressed. Without thinking, she nonchalantly pulled her t-shirt over her head and handed it to Lee. Beneath the tee, she was wearing a sleeveless white tank top over her bra. Her shoulders and arms were tightly muscled and toned. The boys' mouths fell open. Sky rolled her eyes twice. Lee picked up the marker and drew directly on the shirt. A moment later, he held up a carbon copy of his earlier design and drew a big circle around it. The fox was perfectly centered, sharp and black. "Thanks," Ash said, pulling the shirt back on and then admiring the design from her inverted perspective. "Thanks a lot," she said, beaming. Sky suddenly felt crowded by the boys but didn't make a scene. They were oblivious, utterly captivated by her fearless new friend. They didn't even know anything about her yet. Sky knew nothing about her either, but she knew this girl was something different, someone unique. The boys peppered her with questions, the more personal of which she artfully dodged or inverted on the questioner. Their chief interrogator was Hambone. He steered the conversation, effortlessly engaging, including and complimenting everyone. He was the consummate showman, selling the air itself with hints of laughter, friendship, and good cheer. Sky kept her head down, doodling, as Ash remained artfully vague. She knew her new friend would only succeed in making herself that much more mysterious, and thus captivating the imagination of her new fans. "And so it begins," Sky muttered to herself. A couple hours later, Ashley and her entourage stood at the center of a large gymnasium. The instructor, wearing a referee's jersey, blew his whistle. "All right, single file line, let's get a head count. Count off. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember your numbers. Today, no one is a zero." This last bit had endeared him to the children. Mr. Z, once an orphan himself, didn't play favorites. He treated the children with respect and got the same from them. Eager to get to the games, the children started their count and quickly finished. 102, the last child yelled. 102, huh? Mr. Z did some mental calculations. "All right, numbers 23 and 24 end game 1, numbers 49 and 50 end game 2, numbers 75, 76 end game 3, the rest to court 4. Evens versus odds. Move now." Sky and Ash, standing next to each other, found themselves assigned to opposing teams. Kasimov was also assigned to the team opposite Ash. He smiled at her as they separated. Ash didn't get a chance to smile back before he looked away. Mr. Z walked the perimeter of the room and dumped baskets of red rubber dodgeballs across the floor. You know the rules. Get hit, you're out. Catch it, the thrower's out, and you get a buddy back. The kids carried the balls to the center, setting up a line of rubber projectiles and returning to their respective sides of the court. Stay behind your line. Cross it, you're out. On my whistle, come and get 'em. One each. He blew a short blast on the whistle and 100 kids sprinted for the center line of their courts. Ash, Sky, and Kaz each grabbed a ball and turned back to their own sides. Ash smiled at Kaz, who blushed as he ran back. Hambone, who started off close to the center, reached the line of balls ahead of the others. He ran down the line and rolled the balls toward his teammates, away from the opposing team and successfully denying them half their opening firepower. Rebound punished him with a well-aimed blast to the shoulder. Ham rolled with the hit and jogged off court, amid cheers from his teammates. On the sidelines, he waited for someone to catch a ball and bring him back into the game. He didn't stay lonely long. 3 kids on each side went down with the opening volley. One kid kicked an incoming ball and Mr. Z called him out. This is dodgeball, not kickball. As the game progressed, more kids got hit and made their way to the sidelines. Ashley danced through the incoming shots. Kaz displayed terrific aim and a powerful arm, but he couldn't hit her. Ash, just as fast and as accurate as Kaz, often fired while he stepped in, scaring him out of the zone. Finally, the game came down to just the 2 of them. Ash didn't realize it, but the boy was the star striker of the punchball team and considered the district's premier athlete. Professional agents and scouts had already inquired about his college and professional interests. Ashley and Kaz were the only 2 players left on the court, the ammo theirs for the taking. They each held 2 balls. Tired of waiting, Kaz hurled his first. Ash dodged it. Undaunted, he threw the second. She dodged again. Kaz stood empty-handed. He could move for a ball, but he'd have to look away from Ashley. She didn't wait. Without warning, she threw the first directly at him. But it was just a little short and bounced before it reached him. Kaz looked up from the first throw just in time to be hit with the blistering fast second. Mr. Z blew his whistle. Court 2, switch.